Order, order. Would everyone please ensure that all electronic devices are turned off or switched to the silent mode? We now continue line by line consideration of the bill. The grouping and selection list for today's sitting is available in the room as well as on the parliamentary website. I remind members about the rules on declaration of interests as set out in the Code of Conduct. We now come to Amendment 17 to Clause 18, with which it will be convenient to debate Amendments 5, 15 and 16 and Clause 18 stand part. And I call Matt Vickers to move Amendment 17.
Thank you. It is a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. Clause 18 creates a new offence of endangering others' lives during a sea crossing from France, Belgium or the Netherlands to the United Kingdom, which results in the commission of an existing offence under Section 24A1, B1, D1 or E1 of the Immigration Act 1971. Subsection 7 states that this offence applies to acts carried out inside or outside the United Kingdom. This is necessary for this offence. Can the Minister explain whether partner countries have comparable offences to this one that can be used to apprehend people in France, Belgium and the Netherlands? The former Director General of Border Force, in his evidence to this committee, is clear that Clause 18 would be more effective if operated by French enforcement agencies rather than the UK, as most of these offences occur in French territory. Can the Minister reassure the committee that in order to successfully prosecute these offences in the UK Border Force will be able to gather evidence collected outside the UK? Can the Minister guarantee that French support in providing this evidence will be forthcoming? And what guarantees has the Home Office been given? In order to be prosecuted under this clause for offences committed in French territorial waters, people would need to be transported to this country if they're not already here, which would have the rather perverse outcome of more people coming and able to claim asylum. As I've not been able to find any reference to this in the impact assessment, I would like the Minister to share with the committee what the Justice Impact Test showed for this new offence. How many new prison places are going to be required at steady state? In other words, how effective does the Minister think this new offence will be? We've tabled Amendment 17 as we suspect the new offence is not going to be greatly used. Amendment 17 would apply the new offence of endangering another during a sea crossing to the UK to any individual who tries to enter the UK illegally and makes their journey in an unseaworthy vessel, removing the requirement for the individual to have done an act to cause or create a risk of death or serious injury. If a person has crossed to the UK in a small boat, they have, by definition, endangered both their lives and the lives of others at sea. These boats are unseaworthy, they're overcrowded, and everyone who gets on board is responsible for that position. And it's not just the lives of those on these dangerous vessels that are placed in danger, but also potentially the lives of those who rescue them. We've tabled Amendments 15 and 16 to increase the sentence for this offence to 14 years. Before the Nationality and Borders Act was passed, Section 25 offences attracted a prison sentence of up to 14 years. The Nationality and Borders Act increased the penalty to life imprisonment in order to discourage unlawful facilitation of migrants to the UK. So why are the offences here for endangering lives at sea so much lower? Since the government has scrapped the Rwanda deterrent, we would like to help them make this damp squib of a bill a bit more of an effective deterrent to those considering making such a dangerous crossing from a safe third country. That's why we've tabled Amendments 17, 15 and 16 to demonstrate that if you get on an unsafe boat to cross the channel, thereby committing an immigration offence, you'll be found guilty of endangering lives at sea. And therefore, as a foreign criminal, deportations should be easier for the Home Office. If the Minister is not going to accept our amendment that everyone arriving on a small boat should be found guilty of endangering lives at sea, I'd like her to give an explanation of how people who cram themselves into overcrowded and unseaworthy vessels have not endangered both themselves, others on that vessel, and those who have to come to the rescue.
Would the Honourable Member give way?
I will.
I thank the Honourable Member for giving way. It's an honour to serve under your chairpersonship today. Would the Honourable Member agree with me that on average we are seeing the number of people per boat increasing each year the Honourable Member alluded to this earlier, which is to say that each small boat is seeing more and more people crowded into that. The Honourable Member's nodding, so he seems to agree with that. And would he agree that because we are seeing more and more people crowded into these small boats, that's accounting for a rise in the numbers of people who are crossing the channel in small boats?
I think, well, I mean, there is the case that more people are coming on less boats, but actually I think there's equally a rise in the number of boats that are coming across. I think both are problematic, but one thing we do know about these boats being filled with yet more people is that they're becoming ever more dangerous, and we've seen some of the horrible consequences and fatalities as a result of that. The SNP's Amendment 5 specifies that the offence created by Clause 18, endangering another during sea crossing to the United Kingdom, cannot apply to asylum seekers. This surely would render the new offence even more ineffective, as people will not be able to be charged until their claims have been determined. If a person has endangered lives at sea, they're perfectly capable of doing so, be that them an asylum seeker or not. Thank you.
Amendment 17 proposed to clause 18 as on the amendment paper. The question is that the amendment be made. Excellent. Mic tap.
Thank you, Mr. Stewart. Good morning, all. Thank you for the amendment, Mr. Vickers, my honourable member. Just want to go through some of the points that you've made there, particularly starting with the French. Now, we saw under the last government what amounted to Twitter diplomacy and continuously bashing the French online and in the papers, and a breakdown of that relationship. Now, we've seen since coming to government that Keir and Yvette, who was out there recently, have looked to reset that relationship and rebuild it. And I believe from recent visits that Yvette has made to France, meeting with the Minister of Interior, has actually been very productive. And the French are looking at their laws and how they can improve on their side. My apologies, the Home Secretary, not Yvette. The smaller room sometimes brings some informality, and I do apologise, Chair. Looking at their laws and to readdress them, including things like intercepting boats that are in shallow water, which has been neglected to date. So that adult approach to politics and working with the French will help us reduce those boat crossings. I certainly will.
Thank you to my honourable friend for giving way on this, and pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. I think my honourable friend is making a really important point, and actually the point is that these kind of cross-channel operations and strategies are more diplomatic than they are legislative. Does my honourable friend agree with me that because the UK is very unusual and that our border force is not a police force, whereas the Police aux Frontières and the Belgian police and actually all other European border agencies are police forces, they're very different kinds of operations and structures that we have, and this needs to be done gently through diplomacy and not through amendments to legislation.
Thank you for your intervention, and my honourable friend makes a really powerful point that the French need to be engaged with diplomatically rather than bashing them on social media and damaging those relationships. So the way forward here is to continue with that gentle diplomacy to bring about the changes in their laws that may well benefit the United Kingdom. And we've already seen results on that front in Germany, where the Germans have changed laws around the facilitation of kit to be used for those crossings. So it's already wielding positive results, and I expect we'll see more of that. And the second point I have to make is that this is fantasy land from the opposition. We inherited a justice system that was completely broken and on its knees, with just 2% of prison places still available. Do the opposition propose sticking all these people in prison? And if so, where are those prison places going to come from, given what we've inherited? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Stewart. It's a real pleasure for the second day to serve under your chairing this morning, and I beg to move Amendment 4, which stands in my name. Of all of the new criminalising clauses which are included in this bill, this is the one that concerns me most. This is the most invidious and the most cruel. As we've heard, what this clause does is propose a new criminal offence of endangering another during a sea crossing, with the proposed maximum sentence of 6 years imprisonment. It's defined as committing an act that creates a risk of death or serious physical or psychological injury to another person during a sea journey from France, Belgium or the Netherlands to the UK. In effect, all of the sea journeys that come across the Channel, mainly by asylum seekers seeking refuge in the UK. But how this is supposed to be assessed is anyone's guess, as any potential transgression of this new clause could only happen in the most chaotic of circumstances on a small boat where people will probably be struggling for their life in order to try and get here. And the only witnesses to any transgression of this new clause are other traumatised souls who just have the great misfortune to be there at that time. And this new offence is concerningly broad and explicitly aimed at those people on the move. It is those on the boat that this new clause exclusively, directly is targeted by this new offence. Think of the people who get caught up in this. The first category that comes to mind is those people who may have been offered rescue by the French, who refused to take that rescue opportunity. And why would they take that opportunity? I mean, these are people who have travelled thousands of miles to get to that very place in order to try and seek asylum within the United Kingdom. Now, I'm supposing that they're the first category that the Minister has in mind for the end of this particular offence. But at its broadest, it's possible to prosecute individuals who in moments of panic or self-preservation inadvertently puts others at risk. This means that someone who makes a sea crossing out of desperation could face a prison sentence simply because of the circumstances of their arrival rather than any deliberate intent to cause harm. This law makes absolutely no attempt to take account of the high risk and chaotic nature of these journeys, where panic, misjudgment, or even attempts to help others could inadvertently lead to criminal liability. But what makes this particularly invidious, and why we should be thinking about this very carefully, it doesn't do one thing to tackle what they said they're supposed to be tackling: the gangs, the people who organise this foul trade, the people who are responsible for putting these people on the boats. It does absolutely nothing to target them. Instead, the only people who will be in the sights of this invidious, cruel clause will be ordinary asylum seekers themselves. Now, the Refugee Convention is clear that refugees should not be penalised for how they enter a country in order to claim asylum. This clause runs a coach and horses through these obligations. It breaches the Palermo Protocol, which enables asylum seekers to be able to make sure that they can claim asylum freely and honestly. And the ECHR memorandum indicates that parents who bring their children on this type of journey that the endangerment offence captures will be excluded from prosecution in almost all circumstances. Now, the key word in that is almost all. They will still be able to be prosecuted, and it's already noted that this could lead to families breaking up. Of course, the other main target for this particular offence is designed to entrap and ensnare those that pilot these boats. And let's just look a little bit about the history, with how far we've come with this new distinction and these new classifying category of people that the government are now after. It was 2019, Mr Stewart, when the government started bringing criminal charges against people identified as steering dinghies across the Channel. Up until this clause, those identified as piloting boat are usually arrested and charged with the offence of facilitating a breach of immigration law. That's section 25 of the IE 1971. Now, the Nationality and Borders Act increased the maximum sentence for this offence to life imprisonment In most cases, the second charge is dropped due to lack of evidence, as I explained, the deeply chaotic circumstances where evidence could be acquired obviously leads to a lack of evidence being presented in any court proceedings. There are, however, been some successful Section 25 prosecutions. For example, that happens when a person pleads guilty to the offence at the first opportunity before it being dropped. The thing is, every dinghy must have at least one person steering it in order to facilitate safe travel. Where there is demand to cross irregularly, particularly in the absence of other safe routes, someone will always be tasked with steering that small boat. If there was no one to steer it, it would set out into the channel, it would go round and round in circles for a certain amount of time, and then it would sink. I don't think that's exactly what the Minister wants. So someone will have to take the responsibility of steering that small boat. Now, usually that's left to the people without resource, the people who cannot afford to give the smugglers and the gangs the money they require to get on that boat at source. It's usually them that are left with this particular invidious task in order to get that boat across the channel. Now, I want to give the Minister a couple of examples. Listen very carefully to the examples that she gave us in the committee the other day. And they were pretty good examples, but I want her to respond to some of the examples of the type of people who are going to be caught up in this. And I want to ask her if she thinks that this is fair and just. The first one, of course, is a well-known case, and I'm certain that practically everybody in this committee will be familiar with the case of Ibrahim Abba, who was convicted of gross negligence manslaughter in 2024, despite the court recognising that he was not a trafficker. He was seeking asylum, and he was coerced into piloting a boat by smugglers. Now, everybody will know, in that tragic circumstance, 4 people died as a result of being on an overcrowded and unsafe boat. Now, despite Mr. Ba's protest at the point of departure that the vessel was unsafe, he was forced to pilot it. And he solely has borne the brunt of the legal consequences rather than the criminals who orchestrated and designed this dangerous journey. Because it was a tragic case and because it received so much attention, someone had to be found culpable and guilty. Step forward, Mr. Ba. Ibrahim Abba is 20 years old and is now starting his 9-year sentence in a young offenders institution. A young offenders institution. I'll give another example just to see what the Minister thinks of this one. Faoud Kake, I hope I've got the name pronounced correctly. He was convicted of illegal entry and facilitating the illegal entry of others in the dinghy he steered for a time and a period in December 2019. He, like all the other migrants on board that unfortunate vessel, were paid agents to be allowed to passage on the vessel, and at some point during that crossing, they all took turns at steering the boat. Of course they would take turns at steering the boat. If they didn't, disaster would almost certainly have happened. Mr. Kakai denied any financial motive, a fact that was accepted by the prosecution, and said he was trying to reach safety and help others in the same situation. He was doing this in order to help others in the same situation. He was sentenced to 26 months imprisonment. Now, Mr. Stewart, I've got more and more examples, but I know that it will tire you, and I know you'll be insisting that I move on. But I'm quite happy to send the other examples of people like Mr. Batten, like Mr. Cathai, who have been caught up in all of this through no fault of their own and who are now spending time in prison. I'm quite happy to send that on to the Minister. What these cases demonstrate is just the sheer cruelty and unjust nature of these new clauses. And what it also demonstrates is that they've already got the powers. These people were convicted under existing legislation. So what's this all about? Why are they particularly using these new clauses to entrap even more people, to go for even more specific types of asylum seekers. Now, we hear again and again, and I'm pretty certain we're going to hear this again, that the government's intention is to use this as a deterrent, to stop people piloting boats, to stop people coming to the UK through irregular means in the first place. They couldn't be more naive if they try. And I'm listening to the Conservative spokesperson who just sort of thinks that all we have to do is criminalise everybody who gets in the boat and arrest them and jail them. They seriously think that that's going to have any impact? I ask the honourable member, does he really think that somebody sitting in South Sudan is thinking about some Tory spokesperson and immigration, what he thinks should happen to them when they arrive there, and they would care less about that? We know that this deterrent argument is bunkum, it is rubbish, and no one actually believes that anything that we design in these ever-hardening pieces of legislation is going to have the slightest impact upon people deciding whether they're going to set out to try and claim asylum in the United Kingdom. In 2023, Mr Stewart, 244 people were charged with illegal arrival, arriving on a small boat, 88 of whom were identified as steering. Over the first 6 months of 2024, 64 people were charged with illegal arrival, including 38 after being identified as the person steering the boat. The latest data shows that in the first 6 months of the Labour government, if we think things are getting better or worse, I don't know if it's better or worse for them, but there has been 86 people arriving on small boats with illegal arrival, including 48 people identified as piloting the dinghy. They have the powers, they have the legislation, and they could use them, and they have used them, so I do not know what this is particularly about. There are already enough asylum seekers being prosecuted without this new clause. And there is an overrepresentation of people who have come from areas like Sudan and South Sudan who find themselves getting caught up in this legislation. People who can't afford to pay the trip and who are coerced or forced into piloting a place in order to secure a place on the small boat. The introduction of this new, broader offence raises the question of whether the government's intention is to punish smugglers or simply to further criminalise people seeking asylum. And that is why my Amendment 5 asks that ordinary asylum seekers who are seeking refuge in the United Kingdom are excluded from the provisions of these clauses. Many individuals and organisations that also provide support to asylum seekers, whether through humanitarian aid, legal advice or practical assistance, could also find themselves in legal jeopardy because of some of the issues around this bill and these clauses. This includes charities offering food and shelter to those in transit, lawyers advising on asylum claims, and even friends and family members who offer guidance on when to cross the channel safely. Under these new provisions, these actions could be interpreted as aiding and supporting irregular migration despite their well-intentioned humanitarian motivations. Now, I don't know about you, Mr Stewart, but I am appalled at the prospect that the people who have looked at this, who have studied this, who have sent us all this evidence and information, those who support some of the most wretched peoples ever to reach our shores, could be caught up in some of this legislation. These clauses represent a further entrenchment of an enforcement-led approach to migration that prioritises deterrence over protection. The human cost of this bill is just far too high, and its provisions risk punishing the very people that we should be supporting. We need surely to prioritise an approach rooted in humanity, justice and practical solutions over one driven by punitive deterrence, over one trying to criminalise even more of these poor souls who end up in the shores of our country. I beg to move the amendments.
Thank you, Mr Stewart. It's an honour to serve on your committee. I'd like to thank the previous speaker, the Honourable Gentleman for Perth and Kinrossshire, and also the Honourable Gentleman for Stockton West. I think that it's just a few points that I want to raise. I think the scope of the clause already outlines provision within the lines which have been proposed for removal. By naming the act of supplying an unworthy sea vessel whilst removing the broader terminology of an act from the bill sets a precedent where we would have to need to outline all possible acts by within the bill, which is wholly unnecessary, and it's not in keeping with the structure of the bill. Mr Stewart, what I would say is, whilst we can say that providing an unseaworthy vessel is the initial act which causes risk to life, this amendment would serve to deprioritise further acts of criminality which could endanger life on a sea crossing. I think this already, the wording provides a sufficient scope to address this scope of the amendment. And just one other further point, following on from this, when we consider Amendment 5 within this grouping, I think we all agree with the sentiment, everybody in this room, that genuine asylum seekers are vulnerable, but it's also important to recognise a point that was made previously on a grouping debate, that someone with the right to asylum could be involved in criminality. The bill already establishes through clause 16 and 17 by this committee, and in this clause, the provision of a reasonable excuse as a defence, creating a clearer distinction between humanitarian activity and genuine asylum seekers, journalistic or academic works, and those involved in immigration crime as well, a point which I believe the honourable member has already conceded in withdrawing previous amendments of a similar nature. Thank you.
Thank you. Tom Hayes.
Thank you, Mr Stewart. And it's an honour to follow the Honourable Member for Dagenham and Rainham, who I think has made a very persuasive case. So she's actually stolen much of what I was going to say, which is quite helpful. But I do want to start just by reflecting on the international situation, following up on the equally persuasive points that were made by my honourable friend Dover and Deal about particularly the relationship between the UK and France. It is worth reflecting on where we are. With the current Home Secretary, we have the first Home Secretary to visit Northern France in almost 5 years. If you want to use a parallel Conservative political time continuum, that was 6 Home Secretaries ago. We also have in December the meeting of the Calais Group in London, which was able to agree a plan to tackle people smuggling gangs. We've already seen Interior Ministers and the Home Secretary from G7 countries meeting in Italy, agreeing a new joint action plan with Germany too. And we've seen the French government appoint a new special representative on migration, Patrick Stefanini, and he is going to be working closely with our new role of Border Security Commander in order that we've got the closest, strongest, deepest engagement and interaction. And I think it's really worth reflecting on that, because actually we aren't going to solve this problem of small boat crossings on our own. We have to repair the damage that was done by the previous Conservative government to our relationships with our major EU allies and partners. One of the consequences of the botched Conservative Brexit deal is that the UK no longer participates in the EU's Dublin system, which determines which countries should take responsibility for processing an asylum claim where a person has links with more than one country and provides a mechanism to return the person to the responsible country. And that's underpinned by a shared database of asylum seekers' fingerprints. How chaotic that we had a deal which robbed us of the opportunity to, if I finish the sentence, to take part in that system, particularly when we heard in oral testimony just last Thursday how the extraction of the UK from that Dublin system, under those chaotic circumstances, has created a pull factor for asylum seekers seeking to come to this country, and I give way.
Mr Hayes, I'm sure you want to focus closely on endangering people while at sea. Katie Lamb.
Thank you, Chair, and I thank the man for giving way. I wonder whether he would like to share with the room whether under the Dublin Agreement we were net recipients of migrants or actually removed more than we received.
I thank the Honourable Lady for that question. I've got another compelling statistic for you, which is that implicit in much of what the Conservatives say is the idea that the UK alone is carrying the burden of asylum seeker hosting. But actually, the UK is 5th behind Germany, France, Italy and Spain in terms of our receipt of the number of asylum seekers in the year ending September. So the point I'm making here is that actually, contrary to much of the rhetoric that we hear in the Chamber and that we may be hearing in this debate, that the United Kingdom is somehow on our own shouldering all of the responsibility for providing a safe place to asylum seekers. In fact, we are not. And I think that's worth mentioning because we are, as a country, trying to repair our relationships.
And it has now been mentioned. Clause 18 would now sensibly be the focus of your words.
In which case, I thank you for your patience, and I will progress to making my more substantive points. So, I welcome this new offence to endanger another life during perilous sea crossings in the UK because we know that life is being endangered. At least 78 people died last year in the Channel, 327 in total on the Channel route since 2014. And with your patience, I'd just like to talk about a particular case study. We know too that some of these lives that were being cut short were incredibly young. A year and 3 days ago, a 7-year-old girl boarded a small boat in northern France with her 3 siblings, with her father and with her pregnant mother. The family joined 6 other children on that small boat, all of them seeking to cross the Channel to reach the UK. 4 other adults completed the complement on the boat. To describe that boat as small is a joke. It was later described as very small, no bigger than the kind a fisherman might use. Too small for the number on board, which reinforces the point that I was making to the Honourable Member for Stockton West, which is that we are seeing the average number of people per boat rising, which accounts in part for the larger number of people trying to cross the Channel to the UK. The little girl that I just talked about was pulled out of the water by rescuers. There were efforts to save her, and they failed. She couldn't be resuscitated. Age 7, that child suffered a heart attack, and she stopped breathing. Her family died. The 6 other children on that boat died. The 4 other adults on that boat died. And later that day, on the 3rd of March 2024, there was another boat crossing that got into trouble. Thankfully, the 47 lives on that boat were saved. And the night before, on the 2nd of March 2024, another boat got into trouble when it deflated because it wasn't seaworthy. And thankfully, again, 20 lives were saved. But 327 lives have been lost on that Channel route. So we know the facts of life in these flimsy boats. We know that every small boat is crowded with more and more people. We know that gangs are set on making as much money as possible, no matter the risk to life. We know that women and children are forced into the middle of ever smaller boats, so that when those boats fold and sink, as they do, it's they who are the first to be drowned or to be crushed. We know that the fuel in containers are so flimsy that they leak, and we know that when this mixes with seawater, salt water, it inflicts the most horrific burns on the most vulnerable people. We know another fact of life on these boats, that the engines are among the weakest, that the life jackets are fake and do nothing and keep nobody afloat. And so I have to ask, why would we oppose this new offence? This is an offence which will ensure that anyone involved in physical aggression, intimidation or coercive behaviour will face prosecution and will face a sentence of up to 5 years. The Home Secretary has been clear. This offence sends a clear message that we will take action against those who are complicit in loss of life or risk to life at sea. And to hear that from a Home Secretary is really important for those criminal gangs that are contemplating criminality. This is about going after those who further jeopardise the safety and lives of others during crossings and who are actively preventing offers of rescue. It's not, as some have said, about criminalising vulnerable people and dangerous crossings. Indeed, the Home Office has already said publicly that the Crown Prosecution Service always considers whether it is in the public interest to prosecute individuals. This is about protecting children, like the 7-year-old whose life was ended a year and 3 days ago. And if I may, I just want to dwell on this point about child protection, because I think it is so relevant to the question of sea crossings and whether we have this offence to try and limit the loss of life. We heard in oral testimony from the Children's Commissioner about the horrifying crossings that are taking place, but we also heard this too, that the Conservatives had forced vulnerable children into horrifying situations when they arrive here in Britain. And I quote, "Children were languishing without proper safeguarding in inappropriate places." I continue to quote, "The Children's Commissioner had to persistently pursue data from her Home Office that hindered her from doing her job. Children who had been victims of attempted organ harvesting, rape, and various other things. And children who were missing, as she says, we still do not know where many of these children are. It is not good enough. So I say this because we have a massive child protection issue on our sea. We have a massive child protection issue in the United Kingdom, and we need this bill to make sure that children are safe. And with the greatest respect,
will the honourable gentleman give way?
I will give way.
Thank you. Mr. Stewart, thank you. It's a pleasure to serve underneath your chairmanship. These steps are being taken following discussions with law enforcement to be as thorough as possible in our attempts to smash the criminal gangs and disrupt their organised activity at the very source, particularly in relation to the endangering another during a sea crossing, but also the supply handling of articles for immigration crime, that we must allow enforcement every opportunity to identify the causes of such crime and use the findings of any investigation to deter further crossings. And if he allows me just a little bit leeway, I would refer to the honourable member from Perth and Kinrossshire, who was speaking about piloting boats. I've got a small
Mr.
area.
Stevenson, interventions must be short.
Okay. Thank you.
Tom Hayes.
I thank my honourable friend for that point, and of course I agree with him. I wanted to continue to dwell on the question of children's social care, because it was this government which has been backing children's social care to look after unaccompanied children, something that was so important in the eyes of the Children's Commissioner. It's we who are seeking to protect children when they make their desperate crossings and when they are here in the UK. And it's no surprise that it's also this government in other areas, such as the bill in its parliamentary session for children's wellbeing and schooling, which is establishing child registers to track children not at school, strengthening multi-agency safeguarding arrangements and assigning a unique identifier to each child. The reason I say this, Chair, is because children's protection is absolutely critical. So if the party opposite, in moving their amendment, had been serious about protecting endangered life and tackling the criminal gangs that threaten children's safety and undermine our border security, why did they do so little in their time in office? And why did they not vote for this bill? They proposed an amendment with the express intention to kill the bill. And as we saw in their chamber, their whips were begging Reform MPs to back the amendment that would have killed off the bill. I saw it with my own eyes. So this is a government which has increased deportations, returns and removals, being at the highest rate for 6 years. We're cutting the costs of the asylum system. And I beg the Conservative Party and their allies Reform to get serious about protecting our borders, to get serious about protecting children, and to stop blocking progress.
Thank you, Chair. It's a privilege to serve under your chairship. I have some comments to make on the amendments in turn, and I will start with Amendment 5 by the Honourable Member for Perth and Kinrossshire. Though I really enjoy the contributions that you've made in several of the committee sessions so far, and I have watched the first episode of The Chief, which I very much enjoyed, and it did, Chair, give me some insights into the outlook and perhaps even ambitions of the honourable gentleman, which were very much to my liking. And though I really enjoy lots of the contributions that you've made with huge passion and indeed compassion for the people with which you're referring, my concern is about how widespread and perhaps the unintended consequences of the amendment that you've proposed. Oh, sorry, excuse me, Chair, of the amendment that he has proposed. In his proposal to exclude asylum seekers from being able to be prosecuted, I am concerned that he has opened up a situation whereby someone who has come here as an asylum seeker, who then seeks to engage in illegal activity to assist more illegal channel crossings, would be exempt from prosecution, which actually undermines a lot of what many of us are trying to do here. So my concern is not with the intention, which I think is incredibly clear, but in fact with the application of this amendment, which I think would go against a lot of the things that we're aiming to achieve. And now for Amendment 17, proposed by the Right Honourable Member for Stockton West. In his speech at the beginning of this section, in proposing the amendment, he didn't give a definition of what would be an unseaworthy vessel. And this, Chair, to me, is potentially another area where, despite the rhetoric, which I think I understand is about appearing to be tougher
on gangs and people who attempt to make illegal crossings and assist illegal crossings, they may actually have introduced an amendment to dilute this bill. And I will explain my reasoning. So, in tying the criminality to the seaworthiness of a vessel, there is the ability of these gangs, which we have talked on both sides of this mock chamber, about they are very fast-paced, they are moving with the times, they are cunning. We also heard in our witness session that they regularly change tack to keep up with legislation and to get round things, which is why we are needing to take the measures that we are. Now, unless corrected, there is no legal definition of a seaworthy vessel, only that a seaworthy vessel is a type of boat or ship that is strong enough to handle the normal stresses of being on the water, such as waves and wind. It's also capable of carrying cargo or passengers safely. So it's about the use of that ship, but also about conditions. So given the feasibility test that's referenced in proposed Amendment 7, needing to pass a reasonable test to be deemed unseaworthy, we could be looking at a situation where, as well as things like having safety equipment on board or having a qualified crew, because though we have perceptions about who these people smugglers are, it's perfectly reasonable that some of them could have had a background in the sea as fishermen or even as people that have transported cargo. So you potentially could have safety equipment on board and a qualified crew. You also, you also have a situation where some of the things that could therefore deem a ship seaworthy would be things like how many members you have on board, which we've discussed even in this session, varies. The provisions on the boat, like food and water, as well as safety equipment, and the weather conditions and the conditions on the sea on the day of travel. So though I do understand, and I would definitely welcome from the Right Honourable Member for Stockton West some clarification on his particular definition of seaworthy, and though I do understand the narrative there of trying to present to be very tough on this issue, my grave concern and opposition to this amendment comes from the fact that I believe it would in fact dilute the opportunity to be tough on those criminal gangs. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr Chair. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. I just want to make a couple of points about the amendments to this clause and then the clause overall. So I think there is I've always been frustrated on immigration policy that from both left and right, people seem to make the same mistake, which is that we forget that immigrants are people and asylum seekers are people. And what that means is, just like any group of people, there are some who are entirely innocent and exploited, and there are some who are seeking to exploit others and are criminals. And we need to make the distinction between those two groups. And the Honourable Member for Perth and Kinrossshire, in his amendment, makes some very important points. And my Honourable friend from Clwyd is quite right about the passion and compassion that's driving this amendment, which I absolutely recognise and support and understand. But I do think we have to be quite clear-eyed about the reality of what is happening in the Channel. Yes, people are in great danger. They are the most exploited, most vulnerable people. But they are not there by accident. They are not panicking because they've stumbled by accident into this boat. There is a large, organised, extremely well-financed criminal enterprise putting them in that position that does not care one bit about whether they live or die. Now, we need to be able to draw a distinction between those vulnerable people that are in that situation and the people that are putting them there. And yes?
Those that are organised and orchestrated and profiting from such activities, and those that are the sharp end of it, the asylum seekers and the immigrants themselves. That's what we need to do. We need to be laser-like focused on the gangs, the people who put together and design this vile trade, and not the ordinary asylum seekers, which is what this criminalisation clauses exclusively focus on.
I thank the Honourable Gentleman for the intervention, but I'm afraid I completely disagree with him about what this bill is doing. Being an asylum seeker is a self-declaration. It is anticipatory. You just declare yourself as one. The system later it ascertains whether that is the correct, you are a refugee or not. And He said earlier about the Refugee Convention not penalising people for the mechanism by which they enter. It's quite correct. But what it isn't is a blanket immunity from any criminal act committed in the sort of commission of it. And he talks about that distinction. What this act does not do is what this bill does not do is say everybody, regardless of any other extenuating factor, will be found guilty of this offence. We heard from the Crown prosecution system, there will be evidence, there will be guidance given about the evidential test and the public interest threshold. There will then be the whole court proceedings, which can make that distinction. This is not about a blanket catch-all, nor is it about criminalising everybody, but equally it cannot be, which this amendment would do, about criminalising nobody, because these people are doing this as they make that distinction. And it's really important, I think, that we have this legislation on the statute book, because we shouldn't be prosecuting the people who do this to the most vulnerable people, who put them in this danger, with immigration offences, gerrymandering it, sort of grandfathering it into legislation from the 1970s. This is a new phenomenon that has picked up in the last couple of years. And I can tell members here, in my work before, when you work with the victims of child trafficking, when you hear the testimonies of those who actually entered the UK in the back of lorries or worse on these kind of boats, it takes years for these children to overcome their trauma and even express how dangerous the situation that they were in. It damages them forever. We have to target the people that do that to them with no compunction at all. So I return to my original point, which is we need to be able to draw a distinction between the exploited and the exploiters. I would argue that the amendment made by the Conservatives and the member for Stockton West doesn't draw that distinction. It categorises everyone as guilty and exploiter should go to prison for 14 years. And the amendment from the SNP does the opposite. It exonerates everyone, and just by declaring themselves an asylum seeker, none of this legislation will apply to them, regardless of any other crimes that they've committed on the way. And I don't think that's right. I think we can and we must draw that distinction. And the final point is, in any other, two final points. In any other walk of life, were you a building contractor, were you a lawyer, were you an event organiser, if you do something by negligence that leads to the death of another person, I would expect you to be held fully responsible for your culpability in that. That should also apply here. Thank you for the intervention. And so we must ensure that that also applies in these boats. The people who put these people in these boats must be held responsible. And then finally, just very briefly, the member for Weald of Kent, the Honourable Lady for Weald of Kent, referred to the Dublin system. And it is quite correct that we heard about the Dublin system encouraging people over. And it's quite correct that the UK was a net recipient of asylum seekers under the Dublin Convention. But actually, if I were Conservative, I'd be very wary of raising that point, because it points to the fact that even when we had the ability to return people to safe countries they'd gone through under the last government, they failed to be able to do so and use that system in the way that they now claim we should be able to. So in conclusion, I think the amendments from one side or the other actually wreck this clause, which is really important to prosecuting those people who put people's lives in danger. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stewart. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. If, as I imagine, the wording won't be changed further in Clause 18, I did just want to draw attention to the fact that there is a lot of concern that people are being criminalised. Well, we're actually going to be criminalising those who are making those crossings and not those who organise the passage. And particularly just in the evidence pack that we were given, Mr. Stewart, the Law Society have raised particular concerns, and I think it is very important that this is just taken as it is. So the Law Society is concerned that parents or guardians could be prosecuted for taking their children on these journeys. They note that the human rights assessment produced by the government for this bill states that parents who bring their children on these types of journeys will be excluded from prosecution under this offence in almost all circumstances. But the phrasing, and this is the most important thing, the phrasing does not rule out prosecution in all circumstances, and there is a concern that that could risk families being split up.
And they ask, and I really would ask the Minister perhaps to address it, that either the government should clarify if this provision is intended to apply to asylum seekers in some circumstances, or to actually amend the legislation to ensure it does not in practice. So I just wanted to put on record that from the Law Society. Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Mrs. Stewart. It is a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. I want to reinforce the points made by the members for Dagenham and Rainham and Clwyd East regarding the member for Stockton's West Amendment 17. I firmly believe that the amendment actually serves to dilute the legislation, and he does not consider the fact that many people are coerced into boats by the belief potentially that they will be safe because there will be life jackets provided. And so many times those life jackets do not meet EU or British standards, or children's life jackets are provided for every person on the boat, or there's not enough life jackets for when people actually get onto the boat. And therefore, people who believe, the gangs who are using this to coerce people onto the boats should be prosecuted for that simple act, in my view.
Shall I have
Please do. Thank you, Minister.
No, it's thank you, Mr. Stewart. It's a while since we began, and it's easy to overlook that I haven't got up on my feet so far. But I think we've had a really interesting debate today. Again, if we look at the amendments before us, they range from the one end of the debate, which seeks, in particular amendments the opposition has put, to criminalise everyone that gets in a small boat and presumably cart them directly to prison, and all the way through to the other end of the argument, represented with his usual passion by the Honourable Member for Perth and Kinrossshire, who feels that if one is an asylum seeker, then it should exempt one from being judged at all on the behaviour that happens on the boat. I'm going to deal with some of these points in turn, but I also want to just compliment the rest of my colleagues who've been making their own comments on some of this, and there have been some very, very important points made. I think it's important, as my honourable friend, the member from Edinburgh East and Musselburgh said, that we're very clear-eyed about what is happening in the Channel. We can be romantic about it in many ways, as the honourable gentleman from Perth and Kinrossshire often appears. Or we can be regard all of those that come over as criminals or a threat. The truth is somewhere in between. My honourable friend of Bournemouth East made a very moving speech about the actual realities of what can happen in these circumstances, which it's easy to forget when we're sat in a very nice warm committee room. I mean, it's not always warm, Mr. Stewart, facing as it does onto the river, but imagine you end up in the water in the Channel. You can last only so long, and you can very easily have a heart attack in some of that cold water and be unresuscitated. Clearly also if you're a child or vulnerable in any other way, then that's likely to happen, and it will happen to you first. I think honourable members for Bassett Law and Clwyd East made some important points about the realities too. Member for Dover and Deal likewise. So what I want to do is just try to work our way through what we're trying to do with this offence, and I'll come on to that, but I want to deal with the amendments first, and then I want to talk about why this offence is in the bill and what it is that we're trying to do. It's not, and also I hope to be able to answer some of the questions that have been asked during this important debate. I also hope my voice is going to last out. So Amendment 15 focuses on the length of sentence attached to Clause 18 and seeks to increase the sentence from 6 to 14 years where an irregular entrant arrival has caused or created a risk of serious personal injury or death to others during the sea crossing to the UK. However, Clause 18 introduces a new criminal offence to be inserted within Section 24 of the Immigration Act 1971. The current offence for arriving in breach of a deportation order under Section 24(1)A of the Immigration Act is 5 years. As Clause 18 will be inserted into Section 24 of the Act, the intention of Clause 18 is to ensure that due to the egregious and serious nature of the acts committed under the new offence, the maximum sentencing is increased, albeit that it remains in line with the existing sentencing framework of Section 24 of the Act. So the issues about the length of sentence are all about keeping sentencing within that part of the Immigration Act coherent and grabbing sort of extra lengthier sentences out of the air to insert them in this particular act can create an inconsistency and mess up the structures of sentencing involved in the Act, which makes it less coherent than it should be, I would say. I think that the offence has been the 6 years, the 5 years so of this offence has been reached having discussed with partners all of the sentences and offences in this particular area, and they rightly reflect a coherence. An increased sentence to 6 years is considered to be an appropriate level of sentence for the endangerment offence. This furthers the deterrence aim of the policy, but nevertheless is not so severe as to deter prosecutors bringing a prosecution in the first instance. And that is another area where I sometimes think that the rhetoric of having even longer sentences actually deters prosecutors from bringing charges at all. And we've seen some of this in the facilitation offences where a life sentence being introduced, and what's happened is actually that fewer prosecutions are actually being pursued as a result of the increasing sentence. Prosecutors thinking that more obvious evidence for a sentence of that length has to be accrued, so they're charging fewer people. So sometimes having an increased sentence can actually lead to a perverse effect in the way in which the system works. So we think I will in a minute. We think 6 years. The sentence in here is in keeping with the Act itself and about right. I give way to
giving way. I've looked at, I'm pleased you talked about the length of sentence. That's something we haven't talked about very much in this debate so far. 14 years is the maximum sentence when we talk about placing explosives with intent to cause bodily injury and other such offences, such as causing death by dangerous driving. To me, 14 years is more applicable for those sentences than this one. Does she agree with me that 14, I just don't understand the rationale with 14 years?
Yes, and it's not for me to get into the head of the honourable gentleman, the member for Stockton West. Maybe at some stage he'll try to talk to us maybe in his remarks later on about why he's picked on this particular number. But I agree with the honourable member for Worthing, is it? Worthing? No. The honourable member for Woking. I knew it began with a W. And Mr Stewart, my own constituency begins with a W. So we're there or thereabouts in that bit of the dictionary. Similarly, Amendment 16 seeks to increase the sentence from 5 years to 14 years where an irregular migrant or arrival has caused or created a risk of serious personal injury or death to others during a sea crossing in the UK and entering without the requisite leave to enter, entry clearance or electric travel authority. Similar to the approach taken for those who arrive in breach of a deportation order and as discussed in relation to the Honourable Gentleman's previous amendment, the sentence under Clause 18 aims to provide an increased sentence when compared to the other offences under Section 24B1, D1 and E1 of the Immigration Act 1971. Under Section 24, the maximum sentence for knowingly entering without requisite leave to enter entry clearance or electronic travel authority is 4 years. The maximum sentence under Clause 18 for journeys involving an endangering act and relating to the same Section 24 offences is 5 years. And we think that that's a proportionate increased sentence compared to the other Section 24 offences. The comparison here is not Section 25 of the same Act, where there is a greater maximum sentence of life, but where there was originally a sentence of 14 years. The last government increased that to life. 5 years is considered to be appropriate because for those acts which have endangered others during a sea crossing. So I call on the Minister to withdraw his amendments when we come to the votes. Turning to Amendment 17, this would fundamentally alter the focus of Clause 18. Where Clause 18 focuses on the acts that have caused or created a risk of serious injury or death to others during a journey by water to the UK, this amendment seeks to criminalise any person for their decision to board an unseaworthy vessel. That is a very wide-ranging offence. Everyone wants these crossings to stop, and my goodness, anyone listening to some of the speeches that we've heard today and knowing what's going on in the Channel wants these journeys to stop. But the effect of this amendment is to criminalise absolutely everybody on board the vessel, and by virtue of the quality of these vessels. Now, I've seen some of these vessels. None of them could reasonably ever be seen as seaworthy, and perhaps if honourable members had actually seen some of them, they wouldn't think that that this was muddying the waters. None of these vessels are seaworthy. I wouldn't want to cross a puddle in them, let alone the Channel, one of the busiest shipping lanes in the world. It's a nonsense, I would say, with all due respect to the Honourable Gentleman, to suggest that the answer to stopping these crossings, an objective which we all share, is as simple as to criminalise everyone who arrives in the UK in this way. Imagine the real-world implications of this. During the Rwanda scheme, 84,000 people crossed the Channel in small boats. Over 150,000 have crossed the Channel when the party opposite was in office. Are we meant to put all of those in jail? Is the Honourable Member really seriously saying that that would deal with this very difficult and complex issue? It sounds even more absurd than thinking that the Rwanda scheme would actually work. So his amendment's unworkable, and I certainly hope that he will withdraw it. Turning to Amendment 5, this amendment again seeks to exclude asylum seekers from the scope of the offences. And again, I understand why the Honourable Gentleman is doing this. In his own analysis, absolutely everybody on board those boats is an innocent asylum seeker. I thought actually that my honourable friend, the member for Edinburgh Musselburgh, made the best comment about that. There are, in many ways, people who come across on these boats. Some of them actually are innocent asylum seekers. Some of them are certainly not. We don't, in a minute, we don't have people trained in Dover to look for coercive control because we think that some of those coming across are wholly innocent asylum seekers. I give way.
I'm sorry to see she's still struggling with a cold. Very bravely, I think the whole committee has noticed. But there's a variety of offences available to the courts in order to make sure that anybody who endangers people at sea can be prosecuted. There's illegal arrival, there's facilitating the illegal entry of others. And then there's what was Ibrahim Baha was convicted with, which was gross negligence manslaughter. All of these things are available to the prosecutorial authorities just now. I don't know why she feels that she needs this one, but it could only be because she has particular targets in mind that she wants to apply these rules to, and I just wish she would just confirm that.
I will try to give the honourable gentleman some insight. I was going to come on to this when I dealt with the actual clause itself, but in answer to his question, this clause is in this bill because we have perceived a change of behaviour in some particular areas. For example, an increase in physical aggression towards other people, to include migrants and third parties. There's a lot more violence on the beaches against French police. There's intimidating and controlling behaviour of others on the boat. There's preventing others from disembarking or calling for help when the boat gets into difficulty. There are physical acts that result in harm being caused to another person whilst boarding the boat or on the boat. There's people being pushed off the boat, including in shallow French territorial waters. There are decisions of the pilots to continue onto the UK when there's been fatalities or serious harm on the boats. There's a range of behaviour which has begun to happen, which this clause is aimed at allowing us to deal with. Now, I'm going to talk to the Honourable Gentleman's amendment, just to say that his view that nobody who's going to be an asylum seeker should be charged under this new clause 18, this new criminal offence, would make it unworkable and render it pointless, since 95% of the people who come across on small boats claim asylum. And however one had behaved on the boat across, whether dandling children over the edge, whether forcing women and children to sit in the middle of the boat, and often the middles of the boats come free and collapse, and the first people to die are the women and children in the middle. If women and children are forced to sit in the middle, they arrive over in the UK with horrific burns because of the combination, as my honourable friend, the member for Bournemouth East, pointed out, of fuel and seawater. All of this behaviour would come into the purview of this clause, and I simply don't agree with the honourable gentleman that just because you are going to claim asylum when you get to the UK, none of your behaviour on the way over should have any bearing on what happens when you get here. So clause 18, which is a new criminal offence under section 24 of the Immigration Act, does not criminalise everybody making these crossings, and it would be pointless and I would say completely unworkable if we were to seek, as the opposition amendments do that. This is about addressing, discouraging and deterring the acts that have caused or created a risk of serious injury or death to others that we are seeing from individuals travelling to the UK by small boats, and we're seeing it happening now. So there have to be consequences for anyone who further jeopardises the safety and lives of others during these dangerous crossings. And those who insist on continuing their journey when assistance is at hand refuse assistance, and often when there have been fatalities, try to prevent others from being rescued. So clause 18 has a specific focus addressing specific acts that create or cause a risk of serious injury or death of others during a journey. We heard during oral evidence last week how these journeys are being made more dangerous by such acts, and there's an increasing propensity of this kind of behaviour to be happening, which this clause is a response to. There have been shocking, tragic cases of women and children being forced and intimidated into life-threatening positions during journeys that are already dangerous enough. This is exactly the type of offending that this law aims to target. The approach cannot be to simply say that whatever happens on the boat stays on the boat. This new offence is another tool designed to curb the endangerment of life. It sits alongside the wider activity against gangs who intentionally place a person in danger by selling these crossings as a viable route to the UK. Fatalities and injuries at sea are taken extremely seriously, and this government is going further than ever to try to bring an end to them. So, Mr. Stewart, I move that this clause stand part.
Thank you. Worship. Mr. Stewart, and can I thank the Minister for a wholesome response to the amendments that have been placed here today, and I totally agree with her when it comes to the Conservative members' amendments, and I really hope that the committee agrees to reject it fully. And I think it's a ridiculous proposition that everybody who comes to our shores have to be criminalised almost immediately they get here. And I just think that's unworkable. There's a couple of things that were said in this debate that I really want to sort of challenge and take head on. And this idea that everything's just black and white, there's either the exploited or the exploiters, and everybody accepts there's a grey area. And everybody, I think, in this committee believes that those who behave in a reprehensible, appalling and awful way, whether that's in a small boat, or whether it's in activities designed to get people in the small boats, should be tackled and should face the full force of the law. And that is right. And all the examples that the Minister gives about some of the dangerous behaviour that goes on in some of these journeys, she's absolutely right to highlight. And I think none of us would want anybody to get away with some of the things that she identifies to say. But there's nowhere in this bill that refers to that activity. There's nothing in the guidance notes, there's nothing in the explanatory notes, there's nothing in the bill that specifies that type of behaviour. So I think if she goes through with this legislation, she's going to have to make sure that that is mentioned and that's going to be included in the bill. And the other challenge she's got with that type of activity that she mentions is that how do you get the evidence for this? This is activity that goes on in the most chaotic of circumstances, of people on a small boat coming across the channel. And we know that people are arrested, and we know that these things are reported. We've seen examples of people who behaved in such a way as the Minister describes, being given the full force of the law. And I think she's still got to convince this committee that there's a need for all of this, and that certain categories of migrant isn't going to be caught up exclusively in what she's recommending. Yes, of course we will.
Intervention. Does the honourable gentleman accept that if his amendment went through, someone could throw a child, or could orchestrate a boat crossing the channel, throw a child off, which this amendment is trying to stop them, and when they arrived on the shores of the UK, could just say, I'm an asylum seeker. And immediately, that would be all it would take for every single prosecution to go through. And when you can, and the only way we would be able to get over that obstacle that they had put in place for their prosecution would for them to go through the entire, they could be French, but they'd have to go through the entire asylum system with the huge backlog that we've got. They'd be placed in a hotel in one of our constituencies, and it would be almost 2 years before we'd be able to get over that obstacle to prosecute them.
And again, and it must be the way that I'm presenting this, Mr. Stewart, that I'm not being understood, and I'm sorry that I've not said clearly enough exactly what is the intention in this, because I have got no intention of that scenario happening. I could say to the Honourable Gentleman and to the Whip, who's actually trying to intervene from his sedentary position, that what their existing offences are in place that deals with the type of activity that the Honourable Member describes. And I gave the example of Ibrahim Abab, who was done for gross negligence, manslaughter. If that happens, of course the law should be flung at them at full course. And that's what happens because we have existing laws in place. Now, the Minister is interested because I listened very carefully to what she said about the description of the new types of activity that she feels this clause is necessary to address. But that has to be specified and that has to be defined. And if she wants to bring back clauses which deal exclusively with that type of activity, then I think they would get a fair hearing. She would get a fair hearing from me. But what this does is because it is so broad, the inadvertent behaviour and activity is going to be drawn into all of these offences, and people who will respond by possibly self-protection, who are trying possibly inadvertent to save people and put people at risk as a result of this, will be caught up in this. So what we need, I think, is just common sense applied to what the Minister's trying to do. Make sure that's reflected in the legislation that she's bringing towards the House, but at this stage it does not do this. Yes, give way.
Just to tease out then what he has said, would he accept that if this amendment passed, that gang members facilitating crossings on small boats would escape prosecution?
Absolutely not. And again, I must be having great difficulty trying to get through to getting it. And I accept that's my responsibility, Mr. Stewart. But that is not in the least attended. There is a variety of laws and legislation which deal with some of the activity that the Minister says. And we know that because, 244 people were charged in the course of 2023. And since the Labour government's come to power, I think it's something like 86 people have been charged with offences. So people are being charged, they are being prosecuted with a serious offences. Now, the Minister has identified new dangerous activity, and she's right to do that. Now, if we want legislation that deals with it, bring that legislation. Don't bring this broad sweep legislation to the House where natural, normal activity which may be designed to help people and protect people, where they could be caught up in all this. And this is the difficulty with this piece of legislation and with this clause. It inadvertently draws people in who do not deserve to do that. And I know it's about targeting the pilots in these boats. And I think there has to be some recognition again about what forces and coerces people into piloting the boats, and an understanding about the situation and why we are actually doing this activity. Again, this fails to take account of any of this. Mr. Stewart, I won't push my amendment to a vote, but there's one thing I'll say in all of this. I'm not standing here making this point as Pete Wishart from the Scottish National Party. Nearly everything I have given to this committee today in this amendment and previous amendments has been supplied, and all the stuff, the evidence has been supplied by all the organisations that the Honourable Gentleman refers to. All the people who work with asylum seekers, who work in their best interest, who tries to promote what they're doing in the United Kingdom, who are trying to serve them. It is them that have given me this, because they are so concerned about the broad nature of so many of these new criminalised causes, and they want to look at it. Now, I'm introducing these clauses just to present this and hope as we go through all the other stages of the bill, we'll have an opportunity to do it. Yes, I'll go through it.
You're very final intervention. I take on board the point the Honourable Gentleman is making, and I can assure him nobody has higher respect than I do for the organisations that have supplied it, and I have been in conversations with them myself. The issue at hand here, though, is, and I know this from having worked in the sector, those organisations are not charged. They are not set up. Their objective is not to stop these gangs or to think through the criminal prosecutions. Their job is purely, properly, to protect migrants. So they will lean towards a very broad definition. And that's why I think the Honourable Gentleman has inadvertently fallen into an accidental trap. Because in exculping everyone from it, you avoid the traffickers, but their job is not to target them.
Pete Wishart.
Absolutely. I think the Honourable Gentleman is spot on. Their concern is with the people who are coming to our shores, their welfare, their condition, ensure that they're going to be supported when they make the journey through the asylum process. That is their job. They've identified that these new clauses do very little to target the gangs that the Honourable Gentleman is referring to. In fact, they do very little at all, and it's all about ordinary asylum seekers. All the new criminalisation clauses that we've debated in the course of the past couple of days are exclusively devoted to the activity asylum seekers coming. Nothing more so than this particular clause. So, Mr. Stewart, I think and I hope that as we get to remaining stages, particularly when it does go through the other places, though that very greatly concerns me and gives me a number of issues, that we will get to a position where we can improve this and we can get to a place where what the Minister, in what her very fine contribution said, will be actually reflected in what we're seeing in this legislation.
Sarah Bull.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It was just a follow-up. I didn't hear from the Minister just a response on the Law Society's concern about parents and guardians being criminalised. I just wondered if I could hear some thoughts on that.
Yes, Mr. Stewart. I think that in general it won't be expected that parents will be criminalised, but there's not a total ban on it. It depends on what actually has happened and what the circumstances were. So it'll be looked at on a case-by-case basis. It's difficult to be more than explicit about that, given that the nature of the offence is a stricter law, which is meant to deter people from making small boat crossings, a signal to smugglers and passengers that fatalities and injuries at sea are taken extremely seriously, and there may well be consequences of particular unacceptable behaviour of the sort that I've talked about. So I wouldn't want there to be an absolute exclusion. But again, I wouldn't expect it to be a large cohort of people that fell within the purview of the new offence.
Yep. I thank members for their contributions, considered contributions. Effective international partnerships obviously can be very useful, but I don't think I would ever forgo anyone's right to scrutinise a partner on Twitter, particularly one to whom we pay so much money. The last government was right to toughen up on sentences for the worst offences. It was right to restrict prisoner release during the pandemic. That created pressure on the prison system. That's why the last government was also right to undertake the biggest prison building programme since the Victorian era. I realise the other side didn't agree previously, but it was right that the last government used the Nationality and Borders Act to increase the penalty for people smugglers to a life sentence.
Yeah. I really was going about that statement to go by because lunch is near. I frankly am quite hungry, but I'm hungrier still for the truth. Would he not accept independent assessments of our prison system, the system that was inherited by this Labour government, as near collapse as being valid? For him to claim otherwise really is quite farcical, and I hope he could withdraw that.
I was pointing out to exactly what I said. I said that the last government was right to toughen up those sentences and make some of those worst offences, make those people stay longer in prison. It was right not to release people during the pandemic, and therefore it was right that they had the biggest prison building programme since the Victorian era. It was also right that the last government used the Nationality and Borders Act to create life sentences for people smugglers. Those vile criminals who profit from the peril of others deserve nothing less. That's why I think it would be right to increase the sentence for this offence, as set out in Amendments 15 and 16, to deter people from engaging in this awful, vile, inhumane trade. So I'd like to move the three amendments to division.
Just as he does, there was a question in this committee about why the proposed sentence length of 14 years was hit upon, and I wonder whether he might wish to illuminate.
I think in the opening remarks we commented on that. I think it has to be as a deterrent. This is a damn straight bill. If you come to this country illegally, if you break it, there should be real consequences. If you put other people's lives at risk, there should be real consequences. I think this is the right sentence. We've put it forward, and people are going to get the right to have a say on it. Yeah?
Why 14 and not 13?
Amendment 17 proposed to clause 18 as on the amendment paper. The question is that the amendment be made. As many as are of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
To the contrary, no.
No. No.
Division.
Division aye.
Sarah Hall.
Aye.
Jay Boswell.
No.
Dave Angela Regal.
No.
Mr. Will Forster.
No.
Becky Gittins.
No.
Tom Hayes.
No.
Katie Lamb.
Aye.
Martin McCuskey.
No.
Margaret Millay.
No.
Chris Murray.
No.
Susan Murray.
No.
Kenneth Stevenson.
No.
Mike Tapp.
No.
Matt Vickers.
Aye.
Joe White.
No.
Pete Wishart.
No.
The ayes were 3, the noes were 13. So the noes have it, the noes have it. Amendment 15 proposed to clause 18 on the amendment paper, and the question is that the amendment be made. As many are of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
On the contrary, no.
No.
Division.
Division no.
Lock the doors.
Sarah Ball.
Aye.
Jay Boswell.
No.
Dave Angela Regal.
No.
Mr. Will Forster.
No.
Becky Gittins.
No.
Tom Hayes.
No.
Katie Lamb.
Aye.
Martin McCuskey.
No.
Margaret Millay.
No.
Chris Murray.
No.
Susan Murray.
No.
Ken Stevenson.
No.
Mike Tapp.
No.
Matt Vickers.
Aye.
Joe White.
No.
Pete Wishart.
No.
The ayes were 3, the noes were 13, so the noes have it. The noes have it. Unlock. Clause. The question is that Amendment 16, opposed to Clause 18 on the amendment paper. The question is that the amendment be made. As many of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
On the contrary, no.
No.
Division. Lock the doors.
Sarah Brown.
Aye.
Jay Cotterill.
No.
Amanda Regal.
No.
Mr. Will Forster.
No.
Becky Gittins.
No.
Tom Hayes.
No.
Katie Lapp.
Aye.
Martin McCluskey.
No.
Margaret Millay.
No.
Miss Murray.
No.
Susan Murray.
No.
Karen Stevenson.
No.
Mike Tapp.
No.
Matt Vickers.
Aye.
Joe White.
No.
Nick Wishart.
No.
The ayes were 3, the noes were 13, so the noes have it. The noes have it. Unlock. Clause 18 has just been debated. The question is that Clause 18 stand part of the bill. As many of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
On the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
I beg to move that further consideration of the bill be now adjourned.
The question is that further consideration of the bill be now adjourned. As many of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
On the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Sorry? Yes, I am.
Room 9, sound. Committee Room 9, sound.